Page turners, these are.
How you get so big into food of this kind?
Hello and welcome into this video. This video is something of an update after 2 years. I'm here today to talk to you about book recommendations, where to start in the Star Wars canon. This is my second video I've done on this. Like I said, about 2 years ago, I did one of these that talks about where to start in Star Wars canon, the current canon, or in Legends canon. And if you want, go ahead and click here or in the description, and you'll find a link to that first video. If you're interested on where to start in the Legends Star Wars universe, I'm going to go ahead and direct you to that video. I'm not going to go over that again because there have been no updates to the Legends universe in the last 2 years. If you want to know more about where to start in canon, I still recommend you check out the previous video I did. I kind of break down good books to start with based off of what your entry point in Star Wars canon might be. So this is my update, as it were, to places that you might want to start, or maybe just book recommendations in general if you have read canon before and you want to know more. Now, just in case this is your first video looking for Star Wars book recommendations, let me really quick tell you what I mean by current canon or Legends canon in case you don't know. Star Wars books have been published for decades. They started even back when the movies were first coming out in the 70s, and have gone through different waves of popularity. Legends universe is basically any Star Wars novel that was published prior to Disney's acquisition of Lucasfilm. All of that was its own universe that was existing with its own events, and then when Disney acquired Lucasfilm, they wiped the slate clean and canon started over. So there is the current canon. A lot of people call it Disney canon, but it really just is the current Lucasfilm canon. And then there's something called Legends, which is what they call the old universe before we started over with what we got with the sequel trilogy. So in between the time of this video and the previous video, we had a lot of really good releases, many of which revolved around the prequel trilogy. Last year, 2019, was the 20th anniversary of The Phantom Menace, Star Wars Episode 1, which means we got a lot of novels that were set around that time, or at least dealing with themes from that film. The big ones were Queen's Shadow by E.K. Johnston, Master and Apprentice by Claudia Gray, and a audio drama which was then released as a script book, which is Dooku Jedi Lost by Cavan Scott. All three of these are great, and they all do very different things, depending on what you're interested in. The big deal with Queen's Shadow is it was the first time we got a novel that was centered around Padme. Even in the Legends universe, we didn't have a book that was about her and her adventures and spending time getting to know her as a character, and it was absolutely wonderful to finally have that. This year, in the summer in June, we're going to get a prequel book called Queen's Peril. But of course, if you're excited to read something about Padme now, Star Wars is all about enjoying stories out of order anyway, so that's a good one to dive into if that's the type of thing you're interested in. It's specifically a story about Padme journeying from her time as queen to senator. It's also just a good book if you are interested in prequel-era politics and how the Republic worked. Again, if you're into prequel-era politics and how the Republic worked, Master and Apprentice is phenomenal. It takes place before The Phantom Menace, and it's about Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan's time together, and the kind of unease that existed in their relationship at first, and how they settled into being such a powerful team together. In the theme of Master and Apprentices, we have Dooku Jedi Lost, which is Dooku's journey of joining the Jedi and how he eventually left the Jedi, all told actually from the perspective of his acolyte, Asajj Ventress, who's kind of digging into his past for various reasons that are revealed in the audio drama. Now, it's an audio drama, not a novel, but I really don't know where else to put it. If you are into reading instead of listening, you can get the script book. It's not a novelization. It's not something that's going to provide you with, like, giant paragraphs of description, but you can at least read it instead of listening to it, if that's better for you. Honestly, I'm not a big audio person, and I love listening to the audio drama, so I wouldn't let that scare you off. And it was one of my favorite stories that came out last year. The other big releases from last year all tied into Galaxy's Edge, so the park at Disneyland and Walt Disney World and Disney's Hollywood Studios. There were two novels that tied in. There was A Crash of Fate by Zoraida Cordova and Black Spire by Delilah S. Dawson. Both of these were really good. I enjoyed them. Black Spire is its own novel. You can read it on its own if you haven't read any other Star Wars books, but it's also kind of a pseudo-sequel to Delilah S. Dawson's other book, Phasma, which is the origin story of Captain Phasma. You absolutely can read Black Spire if you're just interested in Black Spire. You're not interested in Captain Phasma at all, and you'll be fine. Personally, I would recommend reading Phasma first and then Black Spire, but it's not necessary. The book A Crash of Fate you can absolutely jump into right now. Crash of Fate is also one of the only, I think, 2 Star Wars novels that are specifically romance novels. So if that's more your gig, it's a good one to read. I'm not a big romance novel person, and I found myself really enjoying it, so even if it's not your jam, I would definitely recommend it. If it is your jam, you'll probably love it even more than I did. And like I said, Black Spire is really is fun. It's just a good way to get the feel of what it's like to be at the park, either if you have been and you want to enhance that experience, or if you haven't been to the park and you want to feel like you've been there. The other things I'd recommend are sequel trilogy era releases that have come out. One of which is Alphabet Squadron by Alexander Freed. Alphabet Squadron is a part of a trilogy. The title book, the first book, is the only one that's currently out. The second book, Shadowfall, is coming out again this summer in June, I believe. That's of 2020, in case you're watching this video far in the future. The entire trilogy might be out. But Alphabet Squadron was really enjoyable. It's about pilots. It's kind of a spiritual successor to the X-Wing novels, if you're familiar with those from Legends. If you're not, you certainly don't need to be. And it's just a fun read about pilots finding their way in the leftover war after the original trilogy, and how things in the galaxy are journeying from the original trilogy into the sequel trilogy. Mostly new characters, some familiar faces along the way. And this is a good place to jump in because you don't need to have necessarily read a whole lot of other things to get it. But because it's an ongoing trilogy, if you want to feel like you're reading something along with people right now and you're not just playing catch up, you can read Alphabet Squadron, be ready for book 2, and you can follow this trilogy along with people who are reading books right now. One other book I'm going to recommend, but also kind of not recommend to you, is a book called Resistance Reborn by Rebecca Roanhorse. I absolutely recommend it because it's a good book. Like, don't take my caution to be a problem with the book. The book was highly enjoyable, but it's not necessarily a book somebody's going to recommend to you as your kind of first entry point into new canon, but it kind of depends on what your goal is. See, Resistance Reborn was the book that led into The Rise of Skywalker that was supposed to take all of the things that had been published prior and kind of capstone them before we get to the film. So it's the Aftermath trilogy, the Poe Dameron comic book series, Star Wars Bloodline, books that I talk about in my previous video 2 years ago. And it's basically taking things that happened in all of these books and finalizing their storylines so that all of that could be ready for whenever they start publishing things after The Rise of Skywalker. The reason why people probably won't recommend this to you as your first book is because it's built on the foundation of all of these books that came before it, even the game Star Wars Battlefront. So it's taking things from all of these different mediums. There's a lot of things that you're just going to have to kind of roll with if you read it first. The advantage to reading it first is you would be all caught up. So if you want to dive into canon, hit the ground running, and be ready to read along with your fellow fans as novels come out, Resistance Reborn would actually be a really good way to do that, because you can read that. It does a really good job of recapping stories for you. If you haven't read them, there's going to be emotional beats that won't mean as much to you. The story will make sense, and if you read that, you'll be familiar with characters and plot points that have happened in the last couple of years of publishing, and will get you caught up to the point where you can have a conversation with fans as stuff comes out. That said, if you would rather start from the beginning, read all of that, have the emotional build-up and the emotional payoff, then avoid that book until you've read a whole bunch of other things. If your priority is getting caught up fast, read Resistance Reborn. If your priority is emotional payoff, read Resistance Reborn, but read a whole bunch of other stuff before you get to it. So that's kind of like my oddball pick that not a lot of people would necessarily recommend, but I think it's a good way to go. Now, there's so many more things I could recommend. I didn't even get into the middle grade novels like the Flight of the Falcon books that came out, some of the Journey to the Rise of Skywalker books like Spark of Resistance. There's a lot out there that can be read, even if you want to go into kids' books. It would probably be better if I focused more on middle grade and kids stuff in their own video, just because at a certain point, there's a whole bunch of novels I haven't even mentioned that are perfectly good, but it's just, trying to say where to start, I have to be picky, right? So if you're watching this video out there and you actually have read a lot of Star Wars books and I didn't mention your favorite one, I'm sorry. This is just kind of my advice on where to start. And like I said, there's several other books that would be really great places to start that I mentioned in my previous video that might actually be more in line with something that you're looking for. But that's what I have. If you have any questions, if you want to know more about publishing, please leave me a comment or find us on social media, join our Discord, and ask there. The advantage to asking in our Discord is you get more than just my opinion, and we have a lot of people in there who know a heck of a lot more than I do. That might be able to give you some advice, at least in the comments. If you have like a specific like or specific character you can that you enjoy, I can give you a more direct answer to something that you might be interested in. But that's what I have. Thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, keep it real and fly casual.
Cooking can be fun.